You know, all of this madness of what's happening and changed the landscape of college football. Brent Zwerneman, he's the one that started this mess, right? Paul and Craig, he's the one that broke the story, and of course it was true.
Threw a grenade in the room and just ran out real quick.
And then Max Olson just threw a bunch of gasoline just because he's an angry, evil young man on the fire Saturday with his story about the alliance of the Pac-12, Big Ten, and the ACC. We love Max. We love Max. I was kind of decompressing for 2 or 3 days. Max, thank you very much. So were you digging around for this, or did somebody just plant that in your lap?
I think it's if I can tell everyone, it was actually Smokey gave me the scoop. Thank you for the scoop, Smokey.
You're welcome. Thank you.
No. It's look. I just think we're in a period right now when you have to be careful about the information you get from people, because obviously, like especially in a case like this, when we got word of this, then you reach out to people in the 3 conferences, and you kind of get 3 different takes, or much more than 3 different takes on what this looks like, how imminent this would be. It is kind of playing a game of telephone with all this stuff, but I think we got a sense, leading up to Friday, that this was, even with Kleefkoff meeting with Bowlesby, that this might be an outcome that made a little bit more sense, at least from the standpoint of, look, we can talk about the scheduling parts of this and the playoff parts of this and all this, but clearly there's a larger political game going on here between Sankey and everybody else, and I think these commissioners do feel like, well, we have to do something, and so this is what it looks like. They feel like working together, and we'll see if it can all come together. But it seems like they have a belief that there's strength in numbers here in a number of ways if these 3 conferences can get on the same page.
Why would they leave out the Big 12 in this?
Well, a couple reasons. One, you've got members of the Big 12 reaching out to these conferences saying, can we join, right? So, like, why would you work with the Big 12, those 8, when you maybe don't have a ton of belief of whether that conference is trying to stay together or not, right? I think that does kind of undercut the Big 12's mission here a little bit, that you've got members of, and I don't blame anyone in the Big 12 for trying to pursue spots in other conferences, but I do think that kind of undercuts the progress a little bit. I think, sure, you could say, well, shouldn't all 4 of these conferences work together? But, I think right now these 3 new commissioners are looking for someone to trust, and so they want to trust each other. And I just think right now it is a difficult time to figure out what is the future of the Big 12. And, I think they felt like they had a little more belief in working together. But it's a good question. I don't know that there's something the Big 12 would have done to disqualify them from voting with these guys and being on the same page as them. It's just this is the direction they went in, and unfortunately, that is from a perception standpoint, that's a pretty tough setback for Bob Bowlesby and the Big 12.
So, Max, there obviously we saw Kirby Hocutt's comments, and I was going to say, like, what do they do next? But you just kind of said it there. You have no idea what they do next. They just, I guess they're just in a holding pattern, huh? And either waiting for invites or just playing this thing out, I suppose.
Well, yeah, there's a couple parts to that. I think that if you're a member of the Big 12 right now, one of the remaining members, I think it gives you a little bit more confidence that these 8 are capable of sticking together, because I think these 3 conferences making this decision suggest that for each of those 3 leagues, expansion is not something that would be like an imminent priority for them. I'm not saying it can't happen down the road here, but I could see them focusing their efforts in that direction. So I think that means the 8 schools probably more likely to stick together here. And I think, honestly, I think next steps here is probably, I understand the presidents, I'm sure, are pressuring Bowlesby to explore all these options and find, is there some way to get, in bed with these Power 5 leagues and stuff like that. But it sort of seems like they should let Bowlesby and the ADs do their job and turn the focus to expansion. And what do you have to do, in adding, I would assume, 4 to 6 new members to the conference that makes it as strong a football conference as possible and gives you, a better argument for, maintaining that Power 5 status. I think that's the future you got to look at here. In addition to figuring out, when Oklahoma and Texas actually depart, I would think that's kind of the next step for Bowlesby in the conference. But certainly, I'm sure there are people who are definitely upset about this development.
Given ESPN's relationship with the American and what those reports were from Bob Bowlesby a couple of weeks ago about basically folding the Big 12 into the American, what would be the enticement for the American schools to want to jump from that ESPN security into this uncertainty that is the Big 12?
Make more money. I mean, they're already reaching out too. They're already reaching out to the Big 12 saying, hey, we're interested if you guys are getting into expansion. I mean, the Big 12, I think, is definitely in a better position here to be the one that's adding schools as opposed to losing schools. And I think even with this, very, very scary threat here that the revenue is from a Big 12 standpoint is heading in a bad direction here without Texas and Oklahoma. I do think if the conference, I think there's still optimism within the conference that you can maintain that A5 Power 5 status. And certainly right now, as we all know, you just don't want to be on the wrong side of that. So I think any of these Group of 5 programs know that if they get, slightly better revenue and more prominence and all that from being in the Big 12, they'll be more successful and they'll be on the right side of this divide here between the haves and have-nots.
How hard do you think, and we'll have Mac on tomorrow, but to be patient, which might be the only way you survive, and also, or possibly, the only way it appears is if you can survive financially for now, and yet this is a conference where nobody has really trusted each other since it started in 1996. How hard do you think that's going to be for the 8 remaining ADs or presidents?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that uncertainty is very tough to live in. I think that Baylor is fortunate to have Mac Rhodes and Linda Livingstone and have two leaders who are on the same page and I think are not the ones in the conference that are going to cause problems in terms of the way they do things. I'm sure that Mac and Linda have to do everything they can to sort of argue for and fight for whatever options they can create for Baylor. But certainly, it's not a good feeling to have another setback like this and to have to think about, are we tied to a conference here that's in bad shape? And, what can we do to improve the situation? Because as we've talked about before, the reason you went and chased the Pac-12 and those kind of ideas is because there's just a very real financial fear here that everybody's feeling, that, how much are we having to slash our budgets in this future when the TV partners come back to the Big 12 and say, we're not paying full price anymore. And so, any outcome that can fix that stuff you want to pursue. And so when you're taking options off the table like this, then you're stuck with these 8. And how much do you trust them? Hopefully everybody understands that they have to cooperate here. But the combination of that uncertainty and knowing that you may be living in this uncertainty for the next few years is tough to swallow.
Max, how much of a concern or how much discussion have you heard about the effect this could have on other sports? I mean, obviously football is the driving factor here, and to a lesser extent men's basketball. We had somebody bring up, like, if you're Baylor or TCU or Iowa State and all of a sudden your revenue is like a third of what it was, I mean, what does that do to volleyball? What does that do to women's basketball? I mean, how much discussion about the collateral damage do you think that there has been?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely a very real fear here, and that's not hypothetical because we just went through it last year. We just went through athletic departments having to brace for, okay, we need to completely rethink our budget here. We need to do furloughs and layoffs and all these things. No matter what financial position you're in as an athletic department, last year when you're thinking about the fear of not having a college football season, or not having attendance or whatever, I think a lot of schools had to deal with this in a very, very tangible way. So yeah, you are still, like, I remember at the Big 12 Media Days when you talked to Bolt and others, there was a sense that those people were still just kind of getting over how exhausting that whole thing was last year. And now you have to pivot again into thinking about, what kind of cuts does this mean to staffing and sport reductions and how much is recruiting hurt and all that, and not just in football. And so, you're right to bring that up because, unfortunately, that is a real fear here that, when you say things like, oh, well, Texas and Oklahoma are 50% of the TV money, like, that's not a small amount of money. That is a huge, huge difference in your operating budget from year to year.
Max Olson with us, Sikkim 365 Radio. He's with theathletic.com. And, It's interesting. The way the conference is set up. I don't know if we had Don Williams on. We mentioned earlier Kirby Hocutt. It's just like every day one of these ADs or all of them wake up and go, "What the hell, man?" Like, how much how much of a grip does Bob Bowlesby have with the commissioner's job right now, considering that this conference is on a life support?
Yeah, that's something that certainly had a lot of conversations on Friday, because that is sort of a natural follow-up question to this is what does this mean for Bob Bowlesby? And I'm sure, I don't have a sense of how bad the fallout was this weekend among Big 12 presidents and ADs. I'm sure there are some presidents who, are really upset about this and really upset about this perception or reality or whatever you want to call it, that, it sort of seems like the Big 12 has been, a few steps behind on this thing. And you remember back when this whole thing began, the leaders of this conference met and talked to each other and walked out of that meeting saying, well, I don't think the Texas-Oklahoma stuff is very far along. I don't think it's very imminent. It's not going to happen in the next few weeks. So it's just from that point forward, from being shocked at the Houston Chronicle report on forward, there has been a feeling that in some ways that, Big 12, sure, they're doing the best they can, but they've been a few steps behind here. And look, if you change commissioners, does that really change, many of the particulars of this, of which schools you would look at in expansion and the things that you have to do to survive? Like, not really. And maybe the relationships Bob Bowlesby has throughout college athletics are more beneficial than making a change here. But no question, I think if you were, the CEO of any business that was going through this kind of turmoil, there would be real pressure and real stress on you to, get this right or move on.
Well, on the other side of that coin, it's evident that there were 8 schools in the conference that listened to Bob Bowlesby and trusted him, and 2 that didn't give a crap what he said about anything. So now those 2 are gone, so maybe he'll be better at his job not having to deal with them.
Yeah, no, certainly certainly you're dealing with a lot less deception today than you were over up to this point. So yeah, I think that's fair. I don't think that there are necessarily presidents and ADs here in the Big 12, the remaining Big 12, that are looking to sort of take on the Texas and Oklahoma role and be the tyrant in this conference or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's possible that or just to say, well, we're in charge here and we make the calls. I think some of those dynamics are gone, and hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to operate in this job. But, as we've talked about a bunch, guys, there's just so many dynamics of this, both present day and in trying to figure out where the future is going, that it's a lot to wrap your head around. And I understand it's very upsetting to a lot of people, and I hear it from lots of folks at Big 12 schools that are certainly scared about what the future holds here and upset about how unfair all of this feels. And so I'm not going to debate anybody that all of this is extremely frustrating.
Max, I got to ask you, this is off topic, but I guess it plays into Baylor's, perception a little bit. But last week they did finally get the NCAA ruling. Been a long time coming, as you know. Obviously, there's no winner here because, of the victims themselves, as we talked about last week on this show quite a bit. But your thoughts on, this 5-6 year NCAA investigation wrapping up, and, for Baylor, had to be counting their lucky stars that it wasn't worse. But then again, like we talked about on this show quite a few times, we weren't really sure what even fell under NCAA jurisdiction that they were looking over. So your thoughts on the finality of the Baylor investigation?
Yeah, certainly like a fascinating conclusion they came to, and I'm sure you guys and your listeners, as you go through that, you have to wonder, like, right, why did we spend 5 years on this when they could have probably concluded from the start that this isn't their jurisdiction, right? This isn't their place to make these judgments on sexual assault scandals. But certainly very, very interesting. I think I'm glad that Dave Aranda and his players, for the most part, aren't receiving, strict punishments for things they had nothing to do with. Obviously, that's, that would be unfair to them. I think, certainly like disappointing, some of the rhetoric from Art Briles' camp, not surprising, but to say he's been vindicated in all this, if you read the report, I certainly wouldn't say that's the case, and certainly I he may think so, but Art Briles is not the real victim in this story, obviously. But yeah, I think it was an interesting piece to read, because clearly this committee wanted to do more and was frustrated that they felt they couldn't do more. But certainly when you drag this thing out as long as you did, and aren't even sure if you have the power to do the things you want to do, it just goes to show you just how toothless the NCAA is and all this stuff that they try to do. And that's why we're in a moment here where a lot of this stuff needs to be reconsidered.
Yeah, and from the beginning, so many things about what should happen to Baylor. And, of course, everyone has an opinion about what a lot of things that could have happened. But in the end, Penn State showed us a lot of things with what Emmert tried to do to them and lost. And then, of course, others along the way. And I think people have to understand. North Carolina.
Go on and on here.
If they'd hammered Baylor, then Baylor would have sued them, and they probably would have lost.
Yep.
Right. The NCAA would have lost that.
Yep.
I think.
Absolutely.
So that's why you get the outcome.
Yep.
They could have written a shorter report and said we can't win lawsuits. So
that's we want to do this, but we've already lost a lot of money along the way.
But reading through that, guys, I mean, to spend 5 years on this, I don't think it satisfies anybody to read through that and see, well, here's the part where we got them on the parking fines. Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, what are we doing here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Even people who wanted to see them hammered after the fact, I heard from plenty of people who are like, what was the point of this? Like, ultimately, what was the point of this? And nobody has an answer for that. Yeah, it's a weird deal.
No.
All right, Max, go back into your big bunker and go create another negative story.
No, he had a very positive one that you didn't bring up from a couple weeks ago. He's talking about the list of things that he can't wait to experience with your kid for the first time, right, when it comes to college football. You wrote that a couple weeks back.
Yeah, the next time I see my kid and I can get out of my office, it's great to share this college football season. But no, I'm kidding. But, hey, you said at the start that Brent Zwerneman started all this, and I just wonder, like, did he really get those two schools into the SEC? That's amazing.
I know. How powerful is he? I mean,
Talk about college football czar. Yeah. There you go, Brent Zwerneman.
What an incredible betrayal of A&M by Brent, but, I mean, good for him.
Exactly.
Max, we love your segment with you whenever we get it. Thank you, buddy. Appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Max Olson from day one with us on Sikkim 365 Radio.
I do have this, and I don't want to read his whole piece because, for one, we don't have the time, but also you need an athletic sub. But, we were talking just a few moments ago and talking with Max about the ramifications of, the money going down and the effect that could have on, other sports that are non-revenue sports. So basically every sport but football. But this one piece from this article that Max wrote, West Virginia Athletics was working on a $93 million budget for 2021 before the pandemic hit and ended up at a nearly $25 million deficit for the fiscal year. AD said they're maintaining 10% budget cuts across all sports going forward. They're working hard to climb out of this like everyone else in their league. The financial challenges of the past year make clear what's at stake if the Mountaineers aren't in a P5 league whenever this phase of realignment wraps up. And I just thought that perfectly encapsulated what we were just talking about a little while ago, that, last year was a hit. You can only imagine what, permanent hits would be like, and it wouldn't be good for a lot of sports outside football.
But and the thing is, last year they made those, and think about what Texas and Oklahoma were doing.
And everybody made them too. Yeah. Like everybody had to.
But everybody's making these budgets and cuts knowing that, or believing that there's going to come back and be the same.
Yeah.
Well, it's not now.
Right.
So now you have to go back to the drawing board again.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, man, it's